where winds whisper through broken stones, and golden masks watch silently from under centuries of dust. You'll find yourself wandering past olive groves under a deep indigo sky, the scent of time and history thick in the air. There's a ruined city just ahead, perched on a rocky hilltop. The kind of place where, if you squint, you might see a torch flicker through a crumbled doorway, or hear the echo of sandals on stone floors that haven't felt footsteps in 3,000 years. This place is Mycenaean, once the seat of kings, and now little more than a tangle of walls and bones. But tonight, it holds something more. A secret, a mask, a ghost. And you, brave listener, are going to dig it all up. Just a warning, though, you probably won't survive this. Not in the clean, well-hydrated, sensible sense of modern life. Because once you touch the past this closely, you don't come back the same. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and the local time. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive late, sun just sinking behind the low brown hills. Shadows stretch long and slow across the dry stones, and the cicadas have already declared their 12-hour workday over. The landscape is quiet now, like it's holding its breath. You hike up a narrow path, gravel crunching beneath your shoes, past thorny brush and leaning pines that creak in the breeze. There's something solemn about it, almost theatrical, like the whole setting was built to prepare you for a single moment. A reveal. At the top of the slope stands a gate, massive, monolithic, and unapologetically dramatic. This is the Lion Gate, Mycenaean's most famous entrance. Two lions, headless now, stand carved into a stone slab, rearing above a column. Their paws rest on an altar, like sentries on eternal lunch break. You run your hand over the rough limestone. The grooves are worn by thousands of years of weather, but you can still feel the power in them. They were meant to impress, intimidate, declare. This is not a village. This is a kingdom. And once you pass beneath it, you're inside the walls of what was once the capital of a Bronze Age superpower. The stones tower around you. Not bricks, not even blocks. We're talking massive boulders, some the size of minivans. They call it Cyclopean masonry, because the Greeks later decided only giants with one eye could have possibly moved these monsters. The first thing you notice is how quiet it is. Not just from tourists, those are long gone for the evening, but a deeper kind of silence. One that makes your ears ache a little. Like even the ghosts are trying not to make noise. Just ahead is a strange circle of upright stones, maybe chest height, cordoning off a wide, shallow pit. Inside it, 6 graves lie sunken into the earth. This is Grave Circle A, and it's the reason you came. Because somewhere in there, behind layers of soil, wood, and time, a king once waited to be remembered. You crouch low and let your mind wander. The ground here has been disturbed, excavated, reshaped a dozen times. But the tombs still hold their secrets. And once upon a time, one of them held a face made of solid gold. A face that someone, Heinrich Schliemann, to be specific, claimed belonged to Agamemnon himself. You brush at the ground with your fingertips, as if uncovering the story directly. Something smooth and cold glints faintly. You ease it free from the imaginary dirt, your hands trembling just slightly. It's a mask. A funeral mask. Not some Halloween party version, but a full, hammered sheet of gold, molded to mimic a human face. It's beautiful, but unsettling. There's something too calm about it. The eyes are narrow and open, the nose sharp, the lips, full and mustached, curved just slightly at the ends, like the wearer knew something you didn't. You hold it in your lap, and time sort of collapses. Because this object, this impossibly fragile, eternal thing, was made before Rome, before Plato, before the Parthenon. It's older than the Hebrew Bible, older than iron. It sat in the dark for over 3 millennia, waiting for someone with gloves and a flashlight and a flair for drama to lift it into the light. And that someone was Schliemann. But we'll save his flair for the next chapter. Right now, let's sit here with the mask a little longer. Because the mask is part of a larger puzzle, one that historians, archaeologists, and amateur YouTubers are still arguing about. You see, this mask wasn't alone. Grave Circle A contained several of these golden death masks, each adorning the skull of a different body, probably male, almost certainly elite. The craftsmanship varies. Some are simpler, with less detail. Others show signs of haste, like the artisan had a deadline and a very nervous client hovering nearby. But this mask, the so-called Mask of Agamemnon, stood out. Not for being flashier, but for being different. Thicker gold, sharper features, a mysterious mustache that no other mask has. Historians still argue whether that mustache was an aesthetic choice, a real portrait detail, or a 19th century embellishment added by Schliemann to boost his book sales. Whatever the case, this mask quickly took on a life of its own. Photos were snapped, articles were written, scholars debated, people gasped, and soon the world believed that Schliemann, dreamer, liar, excavator, self-made millionaire, had actually found the face of the king who led the Greeks to Troy. There's just one problem. Well, actually several problems, but let's start with the most basic, timing. The Mask of Agamemnon dates to around 1550 to 1500 BCE, but the traditional dating of the Trojan War, based on a wobbly mashup of Homer, Herodotus, and hopeful guesses, places it around 1200 BCE. That's a 300-year gap. Like someone digging up a pair of boots from the 1700s and confidently announcing, "These belong to Napoleon." Historians still argue whether that chronological mismatch can be reconciled by shifting the dating of Homeric myth or adjusting radiocarbon wiggle room. But let's be real, it's not great evidence. Still, myths don't worry much about calendars. They survive because they're memorable, not accurate. And Schliemann, bless his chaotic heart, didn't mind a little chronological fudging if it meant landing a bestseller. So now here you are, sitting by the grave pit, holding a mask that may or may not belong to anyone famous, in a city that might have inspired epics, or might have just been a rich town with excellent architects and better PR. The moon has climbed higher now. The stones glow faintly in the silver light. A soft wind moves through the ruins, not quite cold, but persuasive, like it's trying to tell you something. You lean closer to the mask. It doesn't speak. It never has. But still it says things. About wealth. About honor. About memory and invention. About how we're so desperate to put names to things that we sometimes write them in Sharpie across the forehead of mystery. Agamemnon, the king who burned 1,000 ships and buried his daughter in exchange for victory. The man who came home to a bathtub and a knife. Whether he existed or not doesn't change the way we feel when we say his name. And maybe that's the point. Because maybe history isn't just what's true. Maybe it's also what we believe hard enough that it becomes real in us. You set the mask down beside the grave. You sit quietly for a while, the moon brushing your face, the mask's eyes turned forever skyward. Somewhere in the dark, a night owl calls once, sharp, high, lonesome. And far below the surface, the earth keeps its secrets. The face stares at you still, but you blink, and time shifts. Dust curls backward. Stones reset. You're not just sitting by a grave now. You're watching a man with an outrageous beard and a very intense forehead stomp up the hillside toward Mycenaean. His name is Heinrich Schliemann, and he's about to make history, or rewrite it, depending on how much wine you've had. It's the late 19th century, and archaeology is still something between a rich man's hobby and an elaborate excuse to loot. But Schliemann? He believes he's on a mission, a holy quest. Not for gold or glory. Well, okay, also for those, but mostly for proof. Proof that the stories in Homer's Iliad were real, that the Greeks weren't just poetic liars, that Troy burned, that Agamemnon walked. And if it takes a little creative interpretation to make that happen, well, Heinrich's not the type to let details get in the way. He'd already made headlines digging up what he claimed was Troy in modern-day Turkey, an effort that involved dynamiting through layers of ancient cities until he hit the one he liked. That's right, dynamite, in archaeology, and somehow that was allowed. Now he's turned his eyes to Mycenaean, convinced that if Troy was real, so were its kings. And if the kings of Troy were real, their enemies must have been too. So here he is, shovel in hand, ego in full bloom, ready to unearth Homeric truth like it's hidden just beneath the topsoil. Spoiler, it kind of was. Sort of. Almost. In 1876, Schliemann receives permission from the Greek Archaeological Society to excavate the site of Mycenaean. Specifically, they ask him not to dig into the ancient tombs until further study can be done. Guess what he does first? You already know. He starts digging into grave circle A, ignoring subtle things like ethics, preservation, and all the pleading letters from scholars who said, "Please, for the love of Zeus, wait." Within weeks, he strikes gold. Literally. He uncovers shaft graves, deep vertical tombs lined with stone, and inside them, a glittering wealth of objects untouched for millennia. Weapons, jewelry, diadems, and those eerie golden masks. And then, drumroll, the big one. The mask. Its surface shines, even in the dim sun of late November. It's like nothing he's seen before. And without skipping a beat, Schliemann writes to the king of Greece declaring, "I have gazed upon the face of Agamemnon." He has no evidence for this. No inscriptions. No signs. Just a gut feeling and an absolutely unshakable belief that the Iliad is more history book than myth. He publishes sketches and photos. The world goes wild. For the first time, people can picture the face of a legendary king. Never mind that the style of the mask is older than Agamemnon could have possibly been. It felt real. And in the realm of late Victorian imagination, that was enough. Of course, not everyone bought it. Some scholars immediately raised red flags. The dating didn't line up. The style was wrong. One German critic joked that the mask looked like a Bavarian gentleman who had fallen asleep at a beer garden. To be fair, the mustache was suspiciously modern. Historians still argue whether Schliemann doctored the mask, had it modified, altered, or even forged to better fit his narrative. Some think he had a local goldsmith subtly improve the facial features before photographing it. Others defend the mask's authenticity, claiming stylistic differences are just part of the Mycenaean artistic range. We may never know, because for all his flaws, Schliemann also brought the world's attention to a forgotten past. Without him, Mycenae might still be buried under sheep and silence. He was reckless. He was brilliant. He was the kind of guy who'd crash a party, start a sword fight, and then publish a best-selling memoir about it. And the thing is, he wanted to believe. He saw himself as a modern Odysseus, navigating ruins instead of seas. And to him, every grave, every artifact was a clue, breadcrumbs leading back to Homer's world. Even if he sometimes salted the trail a bit. One of the most peculiar details? Schliemann insisted his wife, Sophia, take part in the digs, and when the treasure was revealed, he staged a famous photo of her wearing the gold jewelry from the tombs. Yes, actually wearing it. Like it was ancient bling from a cursed Etsy shop. The press went nuts, and the scientific community, predictably, lost its mind. But again, Schliemann didn't care. Because to him, history wasn't about sterile museums and footnotes. It was about drama, about bringing myth to life, about putting a face on stories. So when he looked down into that grave and saw the gleaming mask staring up, he didn't see doubt or data. He saw a king. You glance back at the mask beside you, lying half-lit by moonlight. It does look royal. Not in the jeweled, crown-wearing sense, but in its serenity, its permanence, its expression that seems both knowing and unknowable. And here's the real kicker. Even if it isn't Agamemnon, even if it was a local chieftain or a wealthy priest or some accountant who embezzled really well, it doesn't matter. Because that mask changed everything. It made the world believe, at least for a little while, that legends could be unearthed, that you could follow a poem, dig into the ground, and pull out a face from your childhood stories. Imagine doing that with the Lord of the Rings. Dig up half a hobbit and scream, "It's Frodo." That's basically the level of Schliemann's boldness. But he was also right in one crucial way. The past wasn't dead. It just needed someone loud enough to wake it. You get up from the grave edge now, brushing off your knees. The stars have shifted. The wind still speaks, low and steady, and there's a rustling in the bushes behind the stone wall. Probably a rabbit. Probably. The mask stays behind, its eyes fixed on eternity, its gold catching just a hint of starlight. And as you step away, you can't help but think that maybe the real ghost here isn't the man in the tomb. Maybe it's the guy who pulled him out. The moon's higher now, more silver than white, and it bathes the citadel in something almost holy. But beneath that serene light, the stones feel heavier. The air feels older. You descend the hill with slow steps, winding down toward the lower terraces of the city, toward the real heart of Mycenae, not the palace, not the throne room, but the tombs. The dead don't lie still here, not in the way you think. You move past what once were homes and granaries, courtyards now lost beneath centuries of collapse. And then, there it is. Squatting against the slope like some kind of ancient mouth, a massive stone doorway taller than a giraffe, leading into the dark. You're at the treasury of Atrus, also known, because archaeologists just love a dramatic name, as the tomb of Agamemnon. You step closer. The doorway towers above you, its lintel stone weighing an estimated 120 tons. That's not a typo. It's the size of a subway car. And no one really knows how they moved it. Ramps? Ropes? Alien forklifts? Historians still argue whether Bronze Age engineers had the tech, or just terrifying stamina. You duck your head and walk inside. The temperature drops immediately. It's cool, dry, quiet. You're in a perfect circle, a tholos, a beehive tomb. The ceiling rises in a high dome above your head, made of layered stones so carefully arranged they haven't collapsed in over 3,000 years. No mortar, just gravity and genius. Your footsteps echo. In the center of the tomb, it's perfectly dark. You turn slowly. No carvings. No altars. Just emptiness. The grave goods have long since been removed. No mask. No gold. No bones. But the walls remember. This wasn't a pauper's grave. It was a display of obscene wealth. It's the kind of place you build when you want everyone, including the gods, to know exactly how important you were. The labor alone would have taken years. The stones cut and dragged, hauled uphill, lifted into place, stacked in silence. And here's the thing. The tomb might not belong to Agamemnon. In fact, it probably doesn't. Most scholars date it to around 1250 BCE. That's roughly the right era, yes. But no inscriptions, no bones, no smoking spear. Just grandeur. Some think it held a king. Others suggest a queen. A few wild theories even propose it was a cenotaph, a symbolic tomb with no body, built just to flex. You run your fingers along the inner wall. The stone's cold, smooth in places, grainy in others. Imagine walking into this place with torches. Imagine the flicker of firelight across the dome. The shadow of the lintel stretching across the floor. The silence. The hush. The unshakable feeling that the dead were watching. And maybe they still are. You turn back toward the doorway, toward the small side chamber where the body would have been laid. It's blocked now, but you can picture it. A small, hidden room tucked off the main tholos, sealed tight, holding treasures you can't even name. One ancient account mentions grave goods buried with kings that included chariots, gold-leafed weapons, and drinking cups shaped like lions devouring bulls. You know, something subtle for the afterlife. Weirdly, one object they've actually found in other Mycenaean tombs? Board games. Flat, stone-carved game boards, with pegs or checkers and intricate patterns. Even in death, the elite needed something to pass the time. Or maybe to outplay Hades in a best of three. You lean against the wall and let your mind drift. Mycenaean tombs weren't always quiet places. In fact, they were visited regularly. For years, maybe decades, families would return to these sacred spots to perform rituals, pour libations, burn offerings, chant songs, maybe even gossip about inheritance. Some tombs show signs of being reopened multiple times, whether that was for reverence or rearranging bodies. Well, historians still argue whether that was common practice or a sign of grave robbing gone ceremonial. What we do know, the Mycenaeans took death seriously. Funerals were massive productions. Picture a cross between a parade, a wake, and a live-action Homeric poem. There'd be professional mourners, music, food, possibly even human sacrifices in earlier times, though that part remains debated. You walk back out into the starlight, the dome now behind you. And ahead, more tombs. Mycenae is dotted with them. Some smaller tholoi tucked into the slopes. Some shaft graves closer to the palace. And in almost all of them, gold. The Mycenaeans loved gold. Not because they minted coins. Nope, no currency yet. But because gold meant you had power. Gold was shaped into everything. Masks, cups, swords, even tiny bees with swirling wings that clasped at cloaks. Archaeologists once found a gold death mask so delicate, it crumbled the moment light hit it. Like the face beneath was made of breath and memory. Not everything was majestic, though. One grave revealed a man buried with his legs awkwardly folded under him, like someone ran out of space. Another held a woman with a necklace of amber imported from the Baltic, which meant either incredible trade connections or an extremely lost gift shop purchase. Even stranger, a child buried with a set of miniature weapons, real bronze, scaled-down blades. Were they ceremonial? Were they toys? Was the kid a tiny warrior or just a favorite heir? We don't know. But standing here, under this ink-dark sky, you feel it. These weren't just burials. These were messages, monuments, warnings, prayers, legacies chiseled into earth and stone, saying, "We mattered. Don't forget." And yet, most were forgotten. Until the pickaxes arrived. Until the gold was peeled from bone and sealed behind museum glass. Until you came, wandering in the moonlight, running your hands across graves that outlived gods. And the masks? They're scattered now. Some in Athens, some in museums abroad. All silent, all glittering, all missing the voices they once covered. You glance one last time at the massive doorway of the treasury. It stands empty. Its stone lions have no eyes. Its king, if there ever was one, is nameless. And yet, you can't shake the feeling that something here remembers. That beneath your feet, in these dry, humming stones, the past is still breathing, still whispering. You just have to lean in and listen. You climb again. The night feels different now. Not darker, but deeper, like the shadows are thicker, the quiet heavier. Mycenaean isn't just a city. It's a skeleton of authority, and you're walking into its ribcage. The lion gate looms ahead. You've seen the photos before, maybe. Two proud lions flanking a central column, carved in high relief on a massive slab of stone. They're more symbolic than lifelike. No eyes, no faces, but they stand like sentries, watching everything that comes and goes. And now, you pass between them. Inside is the citadel, the royal compound. This was once the stronghold of a people who dreamed in bronze and gold. A place where warlords met in megarons, where decisions bent the fate of islands, where tablets were scratched with orders for ships and grain and sacrifices. And yes, the palace is burned. We'll get there. But first you walk. Stone walls still rise on either side, jagged now, half-eaten by time. But once they were tall, dressed in ashlar blocks, polished and painted. Inside the walls, the ground levels out. Here was the palace proper. Gone now, but you can trace its bones, the layout of corridors, workshops, courtyards, and that centerpiece of Mycenaean architecture, the megaron. You enter what was once the main hall. The floor's gone, but the circular hearth is still visible, a shallow depression where the fire once lived, ringed with stone. Around it, for massive column bases mark where wooden supports held up the ceiling. You imagine it. Warm orange light, smoke rising into a vent, flickering across painted walls. And those walls? Oh, they were vivid. Frescoes covered everything. Grasping octopuses, women with curled black hair and flounced skirts. Gods half human, half beast. One famous panel shows a man riding a chariot into battle, shield raised, hair flying. Another, more surreal, depicts a griffin calmly watching a procession of women, as if that's a normal Tuesday. The colors, ochre, blue, white, red, are faded now, but still cling in streaks. They weren't just decoration. They were power statements. Political propaganda, in technicolor. And under all this splendor, bureaucracy. You might think palaces like this were chaotic. But the Mycenaeans? They were methodical. Rooms filled with storage jars, labeled with linear script. Tablet after tablet recording oil, grain, wool, bronze. The system worked so well, they were basically running early spreadsheets in clay. One of the tablets even casually notes, Woman, 1, tripod, 2, for the gods. Which raises questions. Was the woman for the gods too? Was she offering the tripod? Or was this just a very badly phrased donation receipt? Historians still argue whether the Mycenaean elite had full religious authority or just liked hanging around temples for the free incense. But what's not debated? These palaces were powerful. They weren't just homes. They were central hubs of administration, military planning, and divine theater. Imagine the West Wing, the Pentagon, and the Vatican, only with more frescoes and fewer security cameras. You walk past what once was a weapons room. Archaeologists found racks of swords, spears, and bronze armor here, some engraved, some mass-produced. You can almost hear the clink of metal, the sharp snap of orders, the constant undercurrent of war. Because let's not kid ourselves, The Mycenaeans were not peaceful poets. They were empire builders. They launched fleets. They leveled cities. They collected tribute. They wove war into the very fabric of their culture. Even the palaces themselves were built like fortresses, strategically placed, high-walled, designed to intimidate and endure. And yet, for all that strength, they fell. Most of the Mycenaean palaces, including this one, burned. Not gradually, not politely, but in waves of fire so intense that stone cracked, frescoes blistered, and the roof beams exploded in red heat. Some rooms show signs of desperate looting, jars broken, valuables scattered. Others, bodies, curled in corners, caught by the flames. Was it invasion? Was it civil war? Was it climate collapse, famine, or plague? Historians still argue whether the fall of Mycenaean civilization was caused by external raids, like the so-called Sea Peoples, or by internal collapse. Most now believe it was a combination: weakened trade, destabilized economies, possible uprisings, and yes, foreign attack. Whatever the cause, the end came fast. The palaces were abandoned. The script disappeared. The art stopped. Greece slid into a centuries-long dark age, where literacy vanished, trade withered, and memory turned into myth. You step outside the ruins now. The winds shifted. Smells faintly like cypress and old dust. You think of the fire again. Of that moment when someone, some servant, priest, or queen, ran through these halls carrying something sacred, trying to save a scroll, a child, a name. Maybe they made it. Maybe they didn't. But the palace didn't survive. Not fully. And yet, here you are, thousands of years later, tracing its outlines in the dark. You walk slowly now, toward the edge of the hill. Below you, the land rolls out in moonlit terraces. Olive groves, scattered farmsteads, shadows. All of it once ruled from here. Not by kings and storybooks, but by real people with real power. They made mistakes. They made enemies. They built beauty. And then it all burned. But even ashes tell stories. And the stones? They still whisper. If you lean in. You're back in the sunlight now, but the world still feels a little haunted. The hills beyond Mycenae sleep under a pale sky. The earth is calm, but something beneath it stirs. Because tonight, we're digging. You kneel down in dry soil, fingertips brushing gravel and grit. Imagine this ground before it was picked and prodded. Before the tourists, before the fences, before the cameras. Just a hill, some scrub, a few sheep wandering by. And then, SHHK, the sound of a spade slicing into history. The year is 1876. The man holding that spade? Heinrich Schliemann, part-time romantic, full-time chaos engine. You watch him now, squinting under the sun. White beard, Panama hat, pocket full of ambition. Schliemann was obsessed with Homer. Not like, I love the Iliad obsessed. More like, I'm going to find Troy with my bare hands obsessed. And, wildly, he actually did. Sort of. But Mycenae was his next passion. And when he arrived here, digging into the grave circle A, he had one goal in mind. Find Agamemnon. You lean closer as his crew uncovers the first grave. A shaft tomb, deep and square, ringed with stone. Inside, the skeleton of a man, his bones yellowed and brittle, lying flat among a blizzard of gold. Rings, cups, dagger hilts, thin sheets of ornament wrapped around his body like foil. And then Schliemann sees it. A face, or rather, a face-shaped mask of hammered gold, staring up from the dust. Smooth cheeks, almond eyes, a thin mustache, closed lips that look strangely smug, like this ancient guy knows something you don't. Schliemann gasps, drops to his knees, and says the line that would make headlines around the world. I have looked upon the face of Agamemnon. Only probably not. You tilt your head. The mask is beautiful, sure. Crafted from a single sheet of gold, pressed and detailed with tiny punches and lines. But even at first glance, you feel it. It's too serene, too symmetrical. And that's when the whispers start. Some scholars claim the mask is authentic, no question. Just one of several golden death masks found in the circle. Others, quieter, maybe a little more suspicious, wonder if Schliemann pulled a fast one. After all, he had a history. At Troy, he may have accidentally salted the dig with artifacts to impress the newspapers. He may have smuggled things out. He definitely claimed his wife wore ancient jewelry for a photo shoot, which later turned out not to be hers, or even ancient. So, Could he have commissioned this mask? Could it have been planted? Historians still argue whether the Mask of Agamemnon was genuinely unearthed where Schliemann claimed, or whether it was found just conveniently enough to match his Homeric dreams. You bend lower, staring into the mask's empty eyes. Whether real or not, it did something extraordinary. It turned archaeology into theater. It made headlines. It sparked museum bidding wars. It rewrote public interest in the Bronze Age. And it made Schliemann a legend. Well, a complicated legend. Because while he did uncover vast Mycenaean treasures, grave goods, weapons, pottery, ornaments, his methods were destructive. He tore through layers without understanding them, discarded fragments, made bold claims without solid proof. Modern archaeologists still wince at the mention of his name, but they also owe him. Because before Schliemann, no one believed the Mycenaeans were real. Not fully. Homer's world was thought to be mostly myth. Heroes and monsters. Poetic invention. And then came the mask. Whether it was Agamemnon or a goldsmith's uncle from 1550 BCE, the fact remains, the Mycenaeans existed. They buried their dead in gold. They ruled from citadels. They crafted beauty with obsessive skill. You walk now along the edge of Grave Circle A. 6 tombs lie here, once surrounded by a stone enclosure. Inside, 17 bodies. Men, women, and children. All rich. All honored. But the burials are strange. Weapons beside infants. Women buried with seals, stones, and daggers. One man with a sword in each hand, like some kind of Bronze Age video game boss. And more masks. 5 in total. Some are crude, flat faces with barely sketched features. Others, like Agamemnon, are almost lifelike. But none are labeled. No names. No epics carved in stone. Just anonymity in gold. That silence. It's deafening. You reach the last grave and pause. Here, a woman was buried with 3 gold diadems, dozens of beads, and a small bronze mirror. Her teeth were worn, her spine curved. But her grave was lavish. Who was she? A queen? A priestess? A matriarch so respected they buried her like royalty? Or just someone loved enough to matter? The wind picks up. You glance back at the mask now on display behind glass in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. It doesn't speak, but it doesn't have to. Because here's the truth. Whether or not it belonged to Agamemnon, the mask tells a different kind of story. Not of kings, but of longing. A 19th century dreamer, desperate to meet his ancient heroes. A man who couldn't resist adding a little theater to history. And in doing so, he gave us a face. Maybe not the right one, but one we could believe in. And sometimes, that's enough. The stone beneath your feet shifts now, smoother, wetter, as if the path itself is remembering something older. You're leaving Mycenae behind, following a ghostly sea breeze south, until the hills flatten and the air tastes faintly of salt and citrus. And then, rising from the island of Crete, like a riddle with no punchline, is Knossos. A palace? A city? A trap? Depends who you ask. You step forward. The ruins look strange at first. Bright red columns, wide staircases, frescoes so vivid they almost hum with color. But something's off. The stones don't match. Some corners feel too crisp, too modern. That's not by accident. Because Knossos isn't just a ruin. It's a reconstruction, and not just any reconstruction, but the dream child of one man's imagination, Sir Arthur Evans. You walk beneath a painted lintel. It's Evans's world now. Half archaeology, half fan fiction, and smack in the middle of it all, a myth so tangled it refuses to die. You've heard it. The Minotaur in the labyrinth. A monster, half man, half bull, trapped below the palace, devouring Athenian youths until clever Theseus shows up with a sword and a string. Cool bedtime story. But also, a cultural grenade. You duck into what Evans once called the throne room. Small space. Stone seat. Red-painted griffins along the walls. The room feels theatrical, designed more for mystery than comfort. Evans saw this and said, "Aha, this must be King Minos's audience chamber." Only, no one knows who Minos was. He's probably a composite figure, part myth, part borrowed ruler, part metaphor for Cretan authority. Historians still argue whether a single king named Minos existed, or if it was more like a title, like Pharaoh or Caesar. What's real, though, is this. The palace of Knossos was a labyrinth of rooms. Over 1,000 chambers, connected by narrow corridors, staircases, storage pits, hidden niches. You could get lost here even with a map, and maps didn't exist. So maybe the labyrinth wasn't just metaphor. Maybe it was this. And the Minotaur? Maybe not a monster. Maybe something worse. You step through the fresco corridor, where dolphins leap over blue waves, and women in flounced skirts toss flowers into the air. The art here is playful, sophisticated, and oddly human. No rigid pharaohs. No stern warriors. Just joy and bulls. So many bulls. Bull leaping. Bull worship. Bull horns carved into stone and placed on rooftops like sacred antennas. The bull wasn't a monster. It was a symbol of divine power, virility, and danger. The myth of the Minotaur might not be a literal beast in a maze. It could be an echo of something cultural, a memory of human sacrifice, or a ritual so foreign that later Greeks turned it into horror. One theory suggests the victims weren't fed to monsters, but killed in bull-leaping rituals gone wrong. Another hints at initiation rites in the palace's underworld, a terrifying journey through dark chambers, echoing footsteps, and the ever-present fear of not coming back. Sound familiar? Even Theseus's string makes more sense now, as a tool not for battle, but for memory, a way to find your way back through twisting corridors or out of trauma. And if the Minotaur wasn't real, Evans kind of made him real anyway. He rebuilt Knossos with that story in mind, added the red columns, restored walls in a style no Minoan architect could sign off on. He made decisions based on vibes, not evidence. And that's the version you see today. Evans even coined the term Minoan, after Minos, because he needed a name for this pre-Greek civilization. Before him, Crete was just pottery shards and puzzled shepherds. After him, it was the birthplace of myth. But here's the twist. Beneath the speculation, there was something astonishingly advanced. You duck into one of the storerooms. Long rows of clay jars called pithoi, once used to hold oil, grain, wine. Some are taller than you. And between them, a drainage system, so precise it rivaled modern plumbing. Pipes, water pressure, toilets with built-in flushing. And yes, some British guests in the 1900s were very confused by that. Upstairs, the frescoes show not just joy, but control. Queens or priestesses, historians still debate which, standing in positions of power. The Minoans may have had a matrilineal society, or at least one where women weren't just decorative. In the city, it thrived. At its peak, Knossos was home to tens of thousands. No massive fortifications. No brutal war art. It felt different. Like peace wasn't a fluke, but policy. Then something changed. Around 1450 BCE, most of the Minoan palaces suddenly collapse. Some blame the Thera eruption, a volcanic event so massive it may have triggered tsunamis, climate disruption, and famine across the region. Others suspect Mycenaean invasion, military conquest from mainland Greece. The truth? Probably both. Knossos limped on under new rulers, then finally fell into disuse. The labyrinth went quiet, but it never disappeared. You close your eyes and feel it, the hum beneath your feet, the slow spiraling echo of stairs upon stairs, corridors upon corridors, the sense that something is always one corner away. Maybe a bull, maybe a lie, maybe just a mirror. But here's the thing, the myth still matters. Not because it's true, but because it was remembered. And remembered things have power, even monsters. You descend now, quietly, into the damp hush of another Mycenaean tomb. Only this one isn't perched in a royal grave circle beneath open sky. This one's hidden, cut straight into the living rock, like a secret someone tried very hard to keep. You duck into the dromos, a sloping passageway carved into the earth, its sides towering above you, lined with crumbling stones that lean slightly inward, as if watching your every step. It's cooler here, quieter. You feel it in your chest, a pressure, soft but steady, like a weight of memory wrapped in soil. At the end, the doorway gapes like a jaw. You step through. Inside, a vast, beehive-shaped chamber, 40 feet high, perfectly domed without mortar, the stones fitted so closely you couldn't slide a credit card between them. This is a tholoi, or beehive tomb, and it's astonishing. Not just because of its size, not just because the engineering has held for over 3,000 years, but because of what these tombs don't say. They're empty now, of course, looted in ancient times. But even then, What was left behind hints at a story both extravagant and disturbingly quiet. You walk slowly across the stone floor. Your footsteps echo, a bit too much. The acoustics in here are eerie. One scholar once whispered from the center and heard their own voice whisper back from the walls, like the chamber was mimicking them. Which weird, but also perfect for a culture that treated death as performance. Remember the grave circle masks? Those were just the prelude. By the time the tholoi were built, roughly 1400 to 1200 BCE, the Mycenaeans had evolved their burial game. These weren't graves. These were portals. Scholars still argue whether the tombs were used for individual kings, entire families, or even dynastic lineages. The biggest tomb, dubbed the Treasury of Atrus by 19th century romantics, because calling something treasury just sounds more dramatic, was likely for someone important. Not Agamemnon, though. Sorry. That myth persists because of the mask and the name, but timelines don't match. The mask is older than the tomb, and the tomb itself? Probably built during a time of power transition, when the kings of Mycenae were trying to prove their dominance by burying their dead like gods. You turn, imagining the rituals, torches, processions, wailing choirs of mourners, some maybe hired for effect, perfumed cloth wrapping the body, weapons, seals, miniature chariots, gold leaves pressed between lips, offerings not just for the gods, but for the journey itself. And here's where it gets really weird. Among the treasures, archaeologists have found items that feel out of place, like Cretan-style objects, fresco fragments, jewelry in the Minoan aesthetic, even symbols that echo the double axe or labyrinth. Did Mycenaeans steal them in conquest? Or were they still borrowing Minoan rituals out of reverence or fear? Some graves even feature Egyptian scarabs or Near Eastern cylinder seals. These weren't souvenirs from vacation. They were status symbols, signs of a globalized Bronze Age elite. And the Mycenaean dead? They wanted to take it all with them. One elite warrior tomb held a sword from Italy, amber from the Baltics, and ivory likely from Syria. Another? A stone carved in such precise detail that modern gem cutters had to triple-check it wasn't a hoax. That's the Pilus combat agate, found in 2015 in a warrior's grave they now call the Griffin Warrior Tomb. The seal shows a warrior plunging a blade into an enemy's neck, muscles tensed, hair flowing. It's 3.6 centimeters wide. The detail is microscopic. You blink. How did they make this? With what tools? Under what light? Historians still argue whether the craftsmanship was Mycenaean, Minoan, or made by a third culture lost entirely to time. And speaking of loss, some tombs, especially for women, contain strange figurines. Not just fertility icons. These figures are stylized, arms raised in gestures of prayer or trance. Were they toys? Deities? Representations of the dead? Their meanings remain utterly obscure. You glance at one, nicknamed the Five Figure because of its shape. It has no mouth, just a long neck, simple eyes, and arms like loops. It looks like it's mid-dream. Maybe death was a dream too. The Mycenaeans didn't leave written religious texts. No Book of the Dead. No codified rituals carved in stone. But what we see, the tombs, the treasures, the careful placement of objects, tells us that the boundary between life and afterlife was more permeable than we'd expect. Perhaps these tombs weren't sealed forever. Some show signs of reopening, reusing, even communing, as if the dead were visited, consulted, fed. There's a reason some tholoi face the rising sun, not just for drama, but to remind the ancestors of light. To let them peek back into the world. You shiver. Because what if those tombs weren't just burial sites? What if they were gateways? And what if, somewhere in this honeycombed hill, the dead are still listening? You step back toward the entrance. The air shifts. A faint breeze, cold, but not unfriendly, follows you out. You don't look back, but you know something does. You walk now through the ash of another ruined palace. The stones underfoot are blackened, charcoaled, melted in places like wax that's been set too close to the flame. This is Pilus, once the seat of a powerful Mycenaean king, now just an outline in soot and memory. But beneath that ash, tucked away in storerooms and fallen walls, something survived. Clay. Dozens and dozens of thin, palm-sized clay tablets, hardened not by intention, but by accident, baked in the fire that destroyed the palace around 1200 BCE. And on them, A lost language, scratched hastily by scribes who never imagined their notes would be immortal. These are the linear B tablets. You crouch next to one, your breath catching. Each line is neat but foreign, angled strokes, intersecting loops, short lines in grid-like patterns. You wouldn't guess it's Greek. And for centuries, no one else did either. The script was discovered in the early 1900s, but it wasn't until 1952 that a self-taught British genius named Michael Ventris cracked it, using logic, persistence, and an obsession that bordered on spiritual. His shocking discovery? The tablets were an early form of Greek, not quite Homer, not quite Socrates, but Greek all the same. Mycenaean, it turned out, wasn't some lost cousin of Greece. It was Greece, an early chapter, written in clay. You brush imaginary dust from your knees. These tablets weren't poetry or prophecy. They were admin records, inventories, grain allotments, lists of weapons, names of workers, gods, animals, even furniture. Imagine a civilization recorded through Excel spreadsheets, and that's linear B. It may sound dull, but in these dry logs, you glimpse a world. One entry lists 120 female slaves, 30 male, 10 children, assigned to temple duties. Another mentions 1 chariot, 2 wheels, 3 horse bridles, given to a local warlord. Still another notes offerings to Poseidon. Yes, the sea god, centuries before he'd appear in Homer's verse. Even more surprising, Poseidon shows up more than Zeus. Historians still argue whether this means he was the top god in Mycenaean worship, or just more popular in certain regions like Pylos and Knossos. Either way, the pantheon was already forming. Before the myths had names, the names already had power. You stand again. The tablets also hint at a bureaucracy that was tight, complex, maybe even anxious. Palaces like Pylos weren't just royal homes. They were command centers, with hundreds of workers, craftspeople, guards, priests, and scribes. And the scribes? They were busy, not just recording taxes or storage, but organizing feasts, tracking religious offerings, logging suitability for sacrifice in one eerie entry, one perfect ram, no blemish. There are even mentions of military watch posts, suggesting the palaces were bracing for something. Because here's the thing. Around 1200 BCE, the tablets stop. Everywhere. Not just Pylos, across the Mycenaean world. Linear B disappears. The palaces burn. The clay gets baked into eternity, but the voices go silent. This is the Bronze Age collapse, an event so dramatic it's still whispered like a curse among archaeologists. Mycenae, Troy, Ugarit, Hattusa. Almost every major Bronze Age city either falls or fades within a generation. What happened? No one knows for sure. Maybe it was climate change, droughts, famines, crops failing. Maybe invaders, the Sea Peoples, a mysterious coalition who show up in Egyptian records like villains in a final act. Maybe it was internal, civil wars, class uprisings, systems stretched too thin. Most likely, all of it. A perfect storm. You glance back at the burnt stone. Pylos was torched so thoroughly, some walls still glow orange in the evening light. No attempt to rebuild. No slow recovery. Just ash. And silence. And yet, one last thing makes you pause. On one tablet, PYTOS 641, a scribe wrote what seems to be a warning. It lists armor, chariots, weapons, all hurriedly inventoried. Scholars believe it was logged days before the palace burned. Someone knew the end was coming, and kept writing anyway. There's something deeply human about that. The need to document, even as the world crumbles. To leave a trace. To say, we were here. This mattered. You whisper that last part aloud. It echoes a little too long. The air is thick tonight, not with smoke or dust, but with a kind of hush. You walk slowly now, not across palace stones or grave-circled dirt, but into the hazy outlines of what might once have been a sanctuary. No columns rise here. No gilded statues or frescoes of robed deities look down from painted walls. In fact, there's very little to see at all. Just a slab here, a cracked urn there. Maybe the worn lip of a stone basin too shallow to drink from, too carefully placed to ignore. But don't be fooled by the emptiness. You're standing in the nerve center of belief, and belief, as usual, is messier and more mysterious than any temple blueprint can explain. The Mycenaeans had gods. We know that much. Poseidon, Hera, Hermes, Artemis, and even a proto-form of Zeus are all mentioned in linear B tablets. But not in myths, not in hymns, not in glorious sculptural epics. Just lines in account ledgers, offering records and odd ritual formulas. One female pig to Potnia, one ox to Poseidon. Potnia, the mistress. That's the title that shows up again and again. Who is she? A local goddess? A mother figure? A borrowed Minoan deity who refused to be translated? Historians still argue whether Potnia was the main deity, a class of spirits, or a flexible honorific for any powerful female divine. But her presence looms. Potnia of the labyrinth. Potnia of horses. Potnia of the grain. She's everywhere, if you know where to look. And you do look now, more closely. At the floor, which is not just floor. It's a clay hearth, its center scorched, its edges blackened from ritual fires long gone. At the walls, where faded ochre lines curl upward in vague spirals. You wonder, was this room a house for a god? Or was the entire palace their domain? Because unlike the Greeks who followed, the Mycenaeans didn't clearly separate secular and sacred space. In some palaces, like Pylos or Mycenae, rituals happened in throne rooms, on hearths, or even in storage halls. Gods weren't aloof, they were part of administration. Which feels right. If Poseidon was the top deity, it makes sense for him to live right next to the armory, right? And yet, there were places set apart. Small shrines tucked into hillsides. Natural caves with marks of offering. Open-air altars where wine, blood, and oil were poured into the ground. In one, archaeologists found a line of small clay figures, each about the size of your fist. They're shaped like men, animals, and horned goddesses. Some of them are terrifying. One has a gaping mouth. Another has no face at all. Their arms are raised, stiff in a posture that might be blessing or warning. You lean closer and swear, for a second, one of them is looking back. Then you remember, this was religion before theology. There were no sacred texts. No priests writing sermons. Just ritual, smell, sound. A goat's cry at twilight. A priestess's feet on stone as she dances in trance. The thump of drums made from stretched skin. The scent of burning barley and honey rising into the dusk. You step into one of these imagined scenes. A woman stands over a fire. Her hair is braided with gold thread, her wrists heavy with bangles. She raises her arms. The others kneel. There's no prayer you can hear, but the silence is the prayer. Then a boy brings forward a bowl. Inside, blood, oil, ashes, and a coin-sized seal stone, too beautiful to burn. He places it on the fire anyway. And just like that, it's gone. You blink and return. The ruins are still. The wind has picked up slightly, stirring the dry grass. But the sense of presence hasn't left. Here's something strange. Some Mycenaean tombs have small holes carved near the base. Just a few centimeters wide. Large enough to pour libations, maybe even speak through. Imagine kneeling at the grave of a parent, whispering to them through stone. Not a prayer, not a plea, just a voice, a presence. Whose name would you say first? You move on, deeper into a nearby cave once used for rituals. It's damp. A trickle of water runs along one side. You follow it to a pool where votive cups were once placed on the floor. The cave is called Agios Georgios, but its older name is lost. In one Mycenaean sanctuary, archaeologists found figurines of bulls, women in bell skirts, and carved representations of double axes. The iconography echoes Minoan symbols, but warped, filtered through another culture's needs. Did the Mycenaeans steal their gods? Or were the gods always shared? You sit down. Somewhere in these shadowy rituals, blood on stones, fires in caves, libations on graves, lie the seeds of later Greek religion. You don't get Apollo's lyre, Artemis's hunt, or Dionysus's wine-fueled madness without first walking through here, through the dark, through the wordless awe. It's less belief than sensation. The ancients didn't always worship with their minds. They worshipped with their knees, their breath, their goosebumps. Just like you, right now. Your footsteps echo now, not on stone floors, but down a narrow, earthen ramp. It slopes deep into the hillside, winding through shadows so dense your eyes need time to catch up. The air grows cooler, older, thick with the scent of minerals, damp dust, and something else. Memory. You've entered a Tholos tomb, a beehive grave. And no, not the kind buzzing with honeymakers, but with ghosts. This one towers invisibly beneath a grassy mound. You would never know it was here from above. Just another bump in the landscape. But underground? It's vast. Its central chamber rises like a vaulted sky, each stone carefully stacked, corbelled, interlocked. No mortar, just gravity and brilliance. They say this is the tomb of Agamemnon, which is poetic but wildly inaccurate. It was built centuries before anyone called Agamemnon by name. Still, you can't help picturing him here, a man with blood on his hands, returning home from war, only to be betrayed by the wife he left behind. Myth seeps into stone whether it belongs there or not. You pause at the threshold. The entrance was once sealed tight with a double door. Inside, the body of the deceased would have been laid on a stone slab, surrounded by weapons, gold, ivory combs, and cups for wine. A warrior's send-off. But the tombs don't all belong to kings. Some held children, tiny skeletons wrapped in linen, buried with a single toy, or a cup carved with an animal. Others housed women with beaded veils and mirrors. And in one case, archaeologists found 4 teens buried with silver masks and bronze swords, their hands still clutching the hilts. Were they heroes? Victims? A family? Historians still argue whether such graves were ceremonial, political, or just hastily arranged in times of chaos. You imagine the funerals, torches, wailing, perfume covering the stench of death, offerings poured until the earth itself felt drunk. But there are stranger tombs, too. In Mycenaean, a shaft grave contained a skeleton with a crushed skull, yet beside it, a golden mask grinned as if nothing had happened. Another held 5 bodies stacked like cordwood, each one buried on a different day. Disease, attack, or a grim tradition. And then there are the grave goods, absurd in their detail. Tiny golden bees. A dagger inlaid with a lion hunt so intricate it would take you a month to notice every detail. A necklace of 1,200 faience beads shaped like lilies. One grave even included a full suit of boar tusk armor, each curved plate drilled and sewn onto leather. That one made your jaw drop. Because here's the thing, most of these graves were robbed long ago, and yet enough treasure remained to suggest that what's missing might have made Tutankhamun jealous. You run a finger along the tomb wall. The stone is cold, ancient. There's something about tombs that sticks with you. The care taken, the objects chosen, the silence held. It's more than fear of death. It's respect, reverence for continuity, for leaving behind not just bones, but a message. Sometimes the message is loud, like a golden death mask shaped to preserve a man's youth forever. Other times, it's quiet. In a lesser-known grave on Naxos, archaeologists found a small wooden lyre, wrapped in linen and hidden behind a child's skull. The wood had nearly rotted away, but the string holes remained. The child had been given a song to carry into the dark. You blink. It's hard to stay detached when the past is this personal. You remember how earlier you walked through palaces and held their beauty at arm's length. But in tombs, the past presses in. It curls around your ankles. It breathes on your neck. Because here, you are not the guest. You are the trespasser. Even so, you keep going. Somewhere near Epidaurus, you visit a chamber with 2 levels of burial. Early graves dug deeper later, almost forgotten. The bones at the bottom are disarticulated, meaning the grave was reused centuries after the first burial. Imagine lying in your eternal rest only to be shoveled aside for someone new. No offense, but rude. And yet, these overlapping burials tell a story. That memory is layered, not linear. That reverence and practicality often collide. That the past is never finished. It's edited, reburied, revised. Sort of like history itself. Back outside, the sun has nearly set. The Tholos mound casts a long shadow, like a giant eyelid half closed. You glance back once more. Not to check for ghosts. Not exactly. Just to say thank you. For the silence. For the reminders. For the unnerving thought that maybe, just maybe, someone will whisper over your bones one day and wonder who you were. You feel that. That's not fear. That's all. The smell hits you first. Not the usual earthy dust or olive oil or cool, mossy cave air. No, this is scorched, bitter, chemical, like something once alive was cooked wrong. The wind is different here too, rushing low along the dry hilltops of Argolis. Something's changed. You're walking through the ruins of a city that died screaming. Mycenaean, once the jewel of Achaean pride. Gold-rich. Fortified. A city where kings wore lions on their walls and gods whispered in palace corners. Now, it's a blackened carcass of itself. You move through the Megaron, where the throne once sat beneath a painted ceiling. Its hearthstone is split. There are soot marks running up the wall, cracks in the floor where the plaster has peeled like old skin. The great central column is long gone, and the frescoes, those beautiful bright scenes, are charred outlines. You can barely tell if you're looking at a dancer or a demon. What happened? That's the thing. No one really knows. Around 1200 BCE, something big broke. And not just here. The entire late Bronze Age world started crumbling like stale bread. Cities fell. Palaces burned. Trade routes snapped. Even writing, linear B, clay tablets, the bureaucracy itself, vanished for centuries. Historians still argue whether it was earthquakes, drought, famine, class revolt, or invaders, or all of the above. Whatever it was, it didn't knock gently. It kicked the door down and burned the house. And you're in that house now. Imagine waking up in this city in its last week. The palace scribes already stopped writing. The granaries are half full, but the guards are nervous. You hear rumors, strange ships off the coast, foreign tongues in the hills, that neighboring towns have vanished overnight, that the gods are angry. Then the fires come. Maybe it starts in the storage quarter. The wine jars explode first, then the oil. Thick smoke coils through hallways like a living thing. You run, barefoot across mosaic floors, slipping in ash. Children cry. The king is shouting, orders or prayers, you can't tell. Somewhere, a woman carries a golden idol under her cloak, refusing to leave it behind. You don't survive this one. Your lungs fill. The roof groans and collapses. Mycenaean, city of kings, dies choking. And when the flames die out, what's left is confusion. Some of the walls were rebuilt, as if survivors tried to hold on. But the rebuilt houses are worse. Cruder stone, simpler tools. No more luxury ceramics or frescoes. The last linear B tablets are mostly supply lists, records of weapons, emergency rations. Panic in baked clay. Then silence. For generations. Archaeologists call it a collapse, but that word's too neat. It suggests a fall from grace, a single event. This was slower. A flickering. A unraveling. One day your city is full of songs and bronze and honeyed wine, and the next, you're trying to trade goat skins for grain. You crouch beside one half-burnt wall. The plaster here somehow still holds a fragment of color, deep red ochre. A stripe, maybe. A garment's edge. A hand. Who painted this? What did they see? Did they flee, or did they burn with the rest? And now the weird part. The Dorians, those often blamed invaders, don't show up in Mycenaean right away. No distinctive pottery. No clear weapons left behind. The city's fall seems more like an internal failure. Maybe not a sword at the gates, but a rot in the core. Some suggest civil war, or a peasant uprising, or famine, so widespread that people turned on each other. Others whisper of the Sea Peoples, that mysterious coalition that ransacked Egypt and the Levant, but no one's sure who they were, either. You stand now in the grave Circle A, where the golden masks were found. They're long gone, safe in a museum, but the pits remain. You look down, half expecting someone to look back. These graves predate the fall by centuries. The kings beneath you died before the world cracked. Did they know it was coming? Probably not. But you can't help wondering if they felt something in the air. A shift. A tension. Because collapse doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Rotting grain silos. Missing tribute ships. Quieter marketplaces. A priest who doesn't show up for the solstice. A dry year. Then two. Then the rumors. Then the fire. You step over a fallen lintel stone, and just beyond it lies the old cistern tunnel, a deep, narrow shaft carved from rock, dropping into darkness. This was their last line. A hidden water supply meant to keep the city alive during siege or drought. You can still climb down if you want. It's steep, the air cold. At the bottom, a trickle of water gleams on stone. You can almost hear the echoes of desperate hands cupping it, whispering that the city would survive. It didn't, but it left fingerprints, golden graves, broken swords and ash, bits of fresco pigment still clinging to soot, and stories. You walk out the city's lion gate, not as a conqueror or archaeologist, or even a dreamer, but as a witness. a quiet guest among ruins. And when you turn back for one last look, it's not the gold you remember, not the masks, not the walls. It's the silence. That strange, enduring silence of a city that once sang and chose not to sing again. You wake to a world quieter than you left it. The palaces are gone, burned or buried. The tablets that once hummed with lists, trade accounts, and oaths, crumbled. No new writing replaces them. No kings send messages. No temples record the favors of gods. You're in the Greek Dark Age now, and you can't see much of anything. For nearly 4 centuries, roughly 1100 to 750 BC, Greece becomes a shadow of its former self. Not gone, just dimmed. Populations shrink. Settlements scatter. Pottery gets plainer. Stone buildings vanish. It's as if someone pulled the plug on the whole Aegean. You wander down a dusty hillside, once the edge of a bustling Mycenaean town. Now it's just scrub and goat tracks. The house foundations here are simpler. No more megarons or marble floors. Just clay huts, low walls, hearths still warm from breakfast bread. And it's quiet. That strange quiet again. Not from death, but from forgetting. Because without writing, memory starts to slip. That's the tragedy and the miracle of this age. On one hand, we lose so much: names, maps, inventions, recipes, laughter. On the other, something begins to grow in that silence. Something called story. You sit by a fire with a group of these new Greeks, though they wouldn't call themselves that yet. You listen as an elder retells the tale of a warrior who fought in a great war, 10 years long, over a stolen woman. A man who sailed for home and got lost in the wrath of the gods. You hear of giants and one-eyed monsters and clever tricks. You hear Odysseus. And even though this Homer guy won't write anything down for another few centuries, the seed is planted here, around a fire, in a dark age, when memory had to survive orally, or not at all. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect real events or poetic invention. Was there a Troy? Was there an Achilles? Were the Mycenaeans the Achaeans? You listen again, and something about the tone, the rhythm, the details, they feel too consistent to be purely fantasy. These aren't bedtime tales. They're anchors. You walk now through the ruins of Lefkandi, a place that shouldn't exist in this narrative of collapse. And yet, it flourishes. It's an outlier, one of the few signs of prosperity in a time of scarcity. There's a building here, long and narrow, like a ship flipped upside down. Inside, archaeologists found a man and woman buried beneath the floor, along with 4 horses and a mountain of grave goods, jewelry, weapons, bronze bowls. It's like a miniature Mycenaean, frozen in defiance of the wider collapse. And there's writing, eventually. Not much, but in Cyprus, in Crete, small bits of literacy flicker back to life. Slowly, the Greeks adopt the Phoenician alphabet, bending it into something new. They add vowels. Make it theirs. It's not bureaucratic like linear B. It's poetic. For storytelling. Emotion. Remembering. You sit by a sea now, watching a boy carve letters into wood. His name, his brothers, and one word. Kleos. Glory. The kind that survives after death. The kind you earn when you're brave, and people sing about you long after you're gone. Even in this age of scarcity, the Greeks are obsessed with immortality through memory. And while the gold is gone, something brighter has started to glow. They invent the polis, not a palace, but a city built around citizens. Communities with shared rules, debate, pride. It's messy, loud, alive, and different from anything Mycenae ever had. You wander from Euboea to Attica to Argos. Small farms, the land. Pottery grows more ornate again. Weapons sharper. Trade, cautious but present. Slowly, the people begin to climb out of the long night. There are no masks now, no lions on gates. But there's something new in their eyes. Hope. Still, the past haunts them. Old tombs are reused and respected. Some are dug open again, not for robbing, but for reverence. Hero cults rise. They find ancient bones and decide, this must be a mighty warrior, and build shrines around them. That's how memory cheats time. It grabs whatever fragments it can and spins meaning from them. You pass one such tomb. The bones belong to an ordinary man, likely a farmer. But someone long ago decided he was a giant. A hero. A protector. They carved his story into stone, left offerings, lit oil lamps. He became more than bones. And so will the Mycenaeans. Not as themselves, but as legends. You leave the village fire and step into the night. The stars above you are the same ones they looked at 3,000 years ago. You wonder what they saw in them. Omens? Stories? Maybe just light that traveled impossibly far to meet a pair of tired eyes. You feel that old silence rising again, but this time, it's not empty. It's pregnant, waiting, brimming with everything the Greeks will become. Because soon, there will be poets, builders, lawmakers, philosophers. But for now, there is you, and the dark, and the sense that something is returning. Not gold, not kings, but voice. You're walking with a man who wears a wide-brimmed hat, a waxed mustache, and the obsession of 10 lifetimes in his coat pocket. His name is Heinrich Schliemann. He thinks he can find Troy, and he's almost right. But we'll get to that. For now, you're standing in the middle of the 19th century. Steam trains, corsets, revolutions. The modern world has begun to hum with invention, but the ancient world? Still wrapped in dust and myth. Until someone starts digging. It begins with a hunch. A line of Homer. A strange hill in Turkey called Hizarlik. Schliemann believes it hides the bones of a city that once burned for Helen. And in 1870, he gets permission, equipment, and a dream bigger than the trench he's about to carve. He digs like a man possessed. Too hard. Too fast. He hacks through centuries of history, Mycenaean, Hittite, Roman, like layers of cake. Boom, boom, boom. Right down to the bottom, where he finds something ancient and wrong. Not the Troy of Homer. Not quite. But he doesn't care. He plants a flag, names the walls, claims the treasure. And, to be fair, he does find something real. Jewelry, weapons, bronze pins, and golden diadems so intricate they sparkle like spiderwebs in firelight. He calls it Priam's treasure, smuggles it out, gifts it to his wife, declares victory. Historians still argue whether he found the Troy, or any Troy, that Homer described. Was it level 6 or 7? Was Homer even talking about a real place, or just conjuring an ideal war to explain moral decay? But Schliemann does something else, too. He turns the public imagination back toward Greece. And soon after, he sets his sights on another hill. This time, in southern Greece. You walk beside him now up to the ruins of Mycenae, long a local curiosity, but never fully explored. He's heard stories. He reads Pausanias, the old travel writer. Hears whispers of a gold-rich city. Thinks, maybe the Atriids are here. You follow him through the Lion Gate, half swallowed by dirt, up toward the grave circles, long overgrown. Then, in 1876, he opens a pit, and the world gasps. You peer into the shaft as it deepens. Layer by layer, he removes stone and rubble. And then it appears. Gold. So much gold it seems molten in the sun. Death masks. Diadems. Beads and pins and blades and bowls. But it's the mask that stops you cold. A face. Calm. Gentle mustache. Closed eyes. As if it's listening to a joke it already knows. Schliemann calls it the Mask of Agamemnon. He's wrong. It predates Agamemnon by centuries. But it doesn't matter. Because suddenly, the Mycenaeans have faces again. They're not names in dusty scrolls. They're people, ornate, buried in splendor, honored in death. The dreamers of lions and labyrinths. You step down into the shaft, past skeletons curled in rest. The tomb smells of cool stone and the sweetness of old dust. You imagine torchlight flickering across golden death masks as ancient priests whisper final words. Maybe a dirge. Maybe a joke. One body holds a dagger etched with a lion hunting scene, so precise you can see the muscles in the lion's shoulders. Another is buried with a golden cup shaped like a boar's head. It's beautiful and terrifying. You run your fingers along the edge of a bronze sword, dulled by time. It feels heavy with everything it once represented, violence and pride, and the price of order. But you also feel something else here. Story. Schliemann's find becomes a sensation. Europe buzzes. Schools rewrite curricula. Museums whisper of new exhibitions. Suddenly, the Greeks before the Greeks are on everyone's lips. And the ghosts stir. More archaeologists arrive. You trail them through Tiryns, Pylos, Knossos. Each dig uncovers more. Pottery with strange symbols, frescoes of dolphins and dancers, clay tablets with unfamiliar writing. Then in 1952, another miracle. A quiet man named Michael Ventris, working with cryptographers and linguists, finally cracks Linear B. It's not some lost language. It's Greek. Early Greek. Bureaucratic. Practical. Alive. And just like that, the Mycenaeans begin to speak again. Lists of grain. Horse counts. Taxation tallies. You find a tablet that records 1 woman, 1 man, 3 rams for sacrifice. Ordinary, but oddly intimate. They weren't mythical. They were real. And so you walk now through a museum, glass case on either side. You see the mask, the daggers, the goblets and pins and combs. You read placards. You listen to docents talk about trade routes and carbon dating and dynastic timelines. But you're looking past all that. You see the man who carved the lion's face, the woman who wore the golden beads, the child who dipped their hand in red pigment and left a print on the palace wall. You hear them now, faint, like whispers behind stone. You're staring into a face that hasn't been seen in over 3,000 years. It blinks. Okay, not really. It's a digital reconstruction projected on a museum screen. But it might as well be blinking. The cheekbones are sharp. The eyes distant. There's a faint downward curve to the lips, like the beginning of a sigh. Meet the Griffin warrior. He died around 1450 BC near Pylos, buried just outside the palace walls, in a tomb untouched for centuries, until 2015, when archaeologists unearthed it almost by accident. You were there, or at least you are now. The tomb was cramped, just a few feet underground. But what it held, oof, for gold rings. A carved sealstone the size of a postage stamp, depicting warriors in combat with impossible detail. Silver cups, bronze weapons, ivory combs, and teeth, which, of course, means DNA. Science does what magic used to. They rebuild his face using forensic modeling. They measure cranial features, estimate muscle depth, map skin and hair based on genetic markers. Then they print him, pixel by pixel, from the dust. He looks young, early 30s, strong jaw, narrow nose, kind of hot, if we're being honest. But here's the kicker, he shouldn't exist. The Griffin warrior lived in a moment of transition, just as Minoan influence waned and Mycenaean power rose. His grave blends both styles, Minoan artistry, Mycenaean weapons. He might have been a conqueror, or a cultural bridge, or just someone who collected cool stuff. Historians still argue about his identity. A warrior priest? A prince? An elite enforcer? Or just some dude who got extremely lucky with his burial budget? You sit beside his bones for a moment. Quiet. There's an intimacy here that's hard to explain. You know his molar size, the curve of his spine, the ring size on his left pinky. It's almost too close. Then again, that's the point. Because we've entered the age of resurrection science. Bioarchaeology, facial reconstruction, proteomics, ancient DNA. The dead are speaking in proteins and isotopes now. You follow the researchers to other dig sites. Tiryns, Thebes, Eleusis. Each unearths more clues. A woman with filed teeth, possibly an early priestess. A child buried with a ceramic duck-shaped rattle. Men with spear wounds healed over, meaning they fought, survived, and lived to tell the tale. And in the bones, traces of diet, stress, disease. You learn the Mycenaeans drank goat milk, ate barley porridge, suffered from joint inflammation, and probably didn't brush nearly enough. Also, their dogs were buried beside them, carefully, with collar charms. Loyalty isn't new. But then you find something stranger. At Mycenae, a tomb with 2 individuals, laid out like royalty. Except one is male, the other, female. And they were buried together, arms crossed, heads touching. Lovers? Siblings? Enemies turned companions? We'll never know. But the tenderness of the positioning melts through the centuries. There's a temptation, in moments like this, to fill in too much. To take one sealstone and invent a love triangle. To build whole biographies out of brooches. And to be fair, archaeologists are cautious. They have to be. Still, some of them are now using AI to model Mycenaean city layouts, predict trade patterns, even simulate palace economies using agent-based modeling. It's like SimCity, but with amphory and animal fat. You sit in on a university presentation where someone compares Linear B records to modern logistics spreadsheets. Turns out the Mycenaeans were hyper-efficient, especially at food redistribution. It wasn't just palace hoards. It was a plan system, which, again, makes the collapse sting even harder. But science doesn't just look back. It looks through. At an excavation outside Pylos, A researcher hands you a VR headset. You slip it on, and suddenly you're inside the palace. Firelight flickers. The frescoes breathe. A woman in a saffron robe passes you with a basket of incense. It's not perfect. It's not real. But it's closer. And sometimes, that's enough. You walk through digital rooms. You smell burning olive oil. You hear goats bleating from the courtyard. You look down and see your feet wearing sandals made of woven fiber. For a moment, the line between then and now blurs. Then the scene fades. You're back in the present. In sneakers. Standing beside a team logging artifact metadata into a database. One of them offers you coffee in a chipped thermos. Griffin Warrior blend, she jokes. Dark and mysterious. You sip, and it's not bad. Back in the museum, a class of school kids giggles in front of the Mask of Agamemnon. One girl asks if he had a beard. Another wonders what his voice sounded like. You smile. Because they're asking the right questions. The kind that keep the past alive. Not as myth, but as something with breath. And now, when people say Mycenaean, they don't just mean a ruin. They mean someone. Someone they can imagine waking up beside. Someone they can argue with, mourn for, maybe even love. The fog doesn't lift all at once, but it does thin, and faces begin to emerge. You're standing at the top of the citadel at Mycenaean, just before dawn. The sky is bruised with stormlight. Wind hisses through the olive trees. Somewhere below, a lion roars. Or maybe it's just thunder curling in the hills. The world is about to end, and it doesn't end with an explosion. No final battle. No sudden wave. Just silence. Rot. Absence. You walk the narrow corridors of the palace. Rooms once filled with scrolls and spice and political gossip now lie gutted. Walls cracked. Frescoes blackened. Roof beams collapsed like snapped ribs. The throne room is eerily empty. You look for footprints. You find only soot. It starts slowly. Around 1200 BCE, wheat harvests fail. Trade routes dry up. The palaces, once so efficient with their grain storage and oil rationing, begin to falter. Linear B scribes stop recording ox hides and perfume ingredients. Workshops go silent. Blacksmiths disappear. And people start running. Pylus is one of the last strongholds to fall. You stand by as scribes frantically record a final set of tablets. Lists of armor distributed. Women taken for temple service. Signs of fear carved into clay. Then fire eats the walls. The tablets survive only because the fire bakes them solid. You watch the flames leap across the horizon. One by one, the great cities of the Mycenaean world are abandoned. Mycenae, Tiryns, Thebes. Some are burned. Some simply crumble. In a generation or two, the knowledge of writing vanishes. For nearly 400 years, Greece falls into silence. No scripts. No kings. No epics. Just scattered communities huddled on hills, clinging to memory. Historians still argue about what caused it all. Was it internal collapse? Climate change? Invasion by the mysterious sea peoples? Earthquakes? All of the above? None. You may never know. But what you do know is this: everything changes. The Bronze Age vanishes. The Linear B tablets stop. The gold masks are buried. The palaces fall. And yet, the stories remain. People remember, poorly at first. Broken tales around fires. Then more vivid, more layered. Names get larger. Heroes grow stronger. Battles more epic. The stories become armor against forgetting. You're listening now to one of those stories. A bard leans on a lyre. Sings of a fleet, a war, a city with tall walls, and a horse made of lies. He tells of Agamemnon, of Achilles, of Odysseus, clever and cursed. You've heard those names before, haven't you? Because what rises from the ashes of Mycenaean is myth. And myth doesn't care about carbon dating. You fast forward to the 8th century BCE. Homer, whoever he was, sings these ghosts into memory, not as archaeology, but as truths. Emotional truths. Cultural ones. The Greeks hear echoes of their forgotten ancestors and build a new world atop the old. The gods return. Temples rise. And though writing is reborn in a different script, the old ones are never fully lost. Sometimes you wonder if they're still down there, beneath the stones, behind the masks, waiting to be heard again. You sit by the lion gate one last time. A breeze stirs. The stones seem to sigh. You think of the faces you've met on this journey. Golden, bone, reconstructed, imagined. They were warriors, scribes, dancers, ghosts, and they're still here, in our museums, in our stories, in our dreams, in you, because now you carry them. You carry the golden masks, the burned scrolls, the broken swords, the clay seals pressed by trembling hands. You remember the perfume that smelled of saffron and sea air, the kings who ruled with ledgers, the dead buried with dogs. And when someone asks about ancient Greece, you won't start with Athens or Socrates. You'll smile and whisper, "Let me tell you about the ones who came before." Because the past doesn't vanish. It lingers, softly, like music behind a wall. All you have to do is listen. The wind has died down now. You're still seated by the old stone gate, but the sky is lightening. In the east, the first gold of morning begins to seep through the clouds like melted honey. The cicadas are quiet. Even the shadows seem to stretch a little longer, as if reluctant to move on. You breathe. It's deep, heavy, full of that ancient dust we've stirred up together, sandal prints in palace corridors, fire-scorched air from palace, and maybe a faint trace of lavender carried on the robe of a queen whose name we'll never know. The world we've traveled tonight is no longer loud. The shouting kings, the clattering armor, the roaring hearth fires, they're fading now. What's left is a hush. And in that hush, there's a kind of peace. You lie back on the hill. Let the stones cradle your spine. Let your fingers brush the dry grass. You close your eyes and still see flickers of gold, the gleam of a funeral mask, the glint of a sword half lost in time. It's okay. The ghosts are quiet now. They've told their story. You've walked beside them. And somewhere, beyond the reach of the wind and the hum of your fan, they're resting again. Let them sleep. And you? You should sleep too. Let the myths drift away like mist. Let the names untangle. Let your breath slow. Just a little more. Slower now. The lion guards the gate. You are safe. Good night.